I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
So you are getting what you owe. Well, you're spoiled, Nikki, because you'll get what you're not. But we'll give you a Zen talk. So recently I gave a talk on delusions and illusions. What do you think about that as a Zen talk?
I'm very excited. I'm always that's look, Pete and I are both behaviorists, and I love behavioral science and talk about it all the time. But I'm always like, let's do another. I want to learn more about Zen. Whenever we sit down to record our podcast, I'm always making a request. So I'm so excited to talk about this today.
Yeah. So I mean, I recently gave a talk, and sometimes like I never know where. It's interesting. Like I like to improvise. And so
Yes,
I'm trying
you
in my professional life,
True.
I'm trying to get a little bit more organized to improvise less, but it's like at my core, I'm somebody who just improvises. Do you improvise? You do.
I like to, I mean, this is not going to surprise you. I'm like a structure and flexibility person. So I like to have like a framework, and then I like to riff.
Okay.
I feel like the framework gives me actually more space to riff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I wish I liked more of that. So anyway, I gave a talk recently about illusion delusion, and I started because I like to connect to what's going on in the world. I mean, I think for me, that's also when East meets West. Like we're trying to bring, to our listeners that there's a lot going on in the world. Everything is behaviorism because everything's behavior. So whatever you're reading, whatever you're, struggling with. And so in the East world, in the spiritual practice, the idea of delusion is that everything we are existing is a delusion. So like right now, if you're driving, it's a delusion. If you're listening to this podcast on your way to the supermarket, or, if you're dealing with like a really challenging boss and maybe about to get fired or moving to, all of it is an illusion, and so
is it an illusion or a delusion? You just use those interchangeably. So I want to make sure I'm understanding.
I knew you would. I think from a Zen perspective, it would be sort of synonymous because it's the idea is that, there's a saying, nothing exists outside the mind and nothing exists inside the mind, and remember, like a lot of the Eastern stuff is trying to like get you confused. So,
yes,
whether it's so let me ask you this, like, a delusion is very much a psychological term.
Yes. And also, I'm just going to say this because we've talked about this in other episodes. The one thing I think is sometimes difficult when we're talking about Zen concepts in English is
exactly.
that these concepts were not written in English. So I think that's where like the translation can then get sort of confusing. Like, oh, well, it's like delusion in English means one thing, and then what it's been translated from in a Zen concept might mean another. But anyway, I just think that's important to say because they may be different. They, same letters, same sounds, but different meaning.
Yeah, and I guess I think I even struggle in the West for differentiating them in a way, to be honest, because I think that's been my meditative practice where I don't know if I see much of a difference between delusion or illusion.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, well, if we talk about delusion just as it's defined, like psychiatrically, right? Yeah. That's a very specific meaning of that word, which is, I mean, I'm not going to pull up the DSM right now. No. Because I don't feel like it, but just being honest. But it's really speaking to something that's happening psychologically when somebody believes something that's not real so intensely, it's so rigidly that it's so pervasive in experience that of course it then can pretty severely and sometimes even dangerously impact their functioning, right? So like that's like a delusion in like is going to be in psychiatric or psychological terms going to mean one thing. When you're talking about it from a Zen perspective of delusion or illusion, I'm with you. I think I would also see them as synonymous.
Yeah. And, So I think that's, and so I started to talk about that in this talk because I was realizing, and I think that's helped me through some of the challenges that I've gone through recently, where I'm like, it's just life, or it's just a job, or it's just suffering, like it's all an illusion, it's all a delusion, which is a really hard place to get to. And so the Zen teaching here is really that's what it is. And what and the context for which I brought this up was like, I was trying to, I was scheduled like 3 different dates to give the talk, and they kept switching on me. And I was like, yeah, sure, I could do it. Yeah, sure. And I was, the first date I was scheduled to talk was on the anniversary, or one of my teammates' birthdays who passed away. And so I was like, oh, that would have been great context, not great, but that would have been context for my teaching, because, impermanence and even just the illusion of loss, because there's a deeper level of spirituality when people leave this life. In the East is a real sort of big concept, reincarnation, which I think we've talked about. But what I wanted to, for listeners, the way that I phrased this was, there's a term called shikantaza. And so shikantaza is just sitting. And so it is a Zen practice of sitting. So sometimes, we've talked about meditation on here, where sometimes people sit and they're working on a koan, which we've done a whole episode on koans. Sometimes people sit and just breathe, and they count their breaths or just breathe. Sometimes people use a mantra. There's transcendental meditation. There's all different things. Shikantaza is a term of just sitting. So whatever comes up in your brain. So I was on one of my silent retreats, and I went into Daisan with one of the teachers, which is like the one-on-one opportunity. And I said, I'm finding myself so distracted, because at that time we were renovating the kitchen, and I was sitting and I just kept thinking about the contractors, how annoying they are. I was like thinking about like what color the countertop should be. And I felt like I was judging myself so deeply. And so this teacher was like, that's shikantaza. Just sit, whatever comes up, let it come up. And so I think it's such a liberating experience, right? Like, what do you think about that as I described shikantaza?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's like, it's interesting, because I think part of that too is like how do I want to say this? It's like the bridge between acknowledging that everything is an illusion and a delusion, and also acknowledging that we live in a human life.
Yes.
Because we're allowed to let things come up and experience, like what you're describing, like what you're describing when you're sitting. It's like, that's what's coming into your brain, because that's what that's what was happening in your life that week. And I think that sometimes the slippery slope, or even, I don't want to say danger, but maybe danger sometimes, like of when people get over attached to Zen concepts like illusion and delusion, is it becomes a way to disconnect from reality.
Yes,
like they actually go like, it doesn't matter. It's like I mean, I don't think you meant it this way, Pete, you just said it's just suffering. It's like, well, yeah. And suffering is like the most unbelievably painful thing that we can encounter. Right. And so I've seen it a lot of times where again, like human brains are human brains. So they can take anything and turn it into experiential avoidance, which, we've talked on this podcast before, means basically the brain trying to like use its cognitive capabilities to maneuver out of, get rid of pain, which, as Buddhists talk about, is an inevitable part of being alive.
Yeah, well, and so what that led to was also like a delusion of choice, because yes, suffering is an inevitable piece. Again, we've talked about that a lot, where we say the East, the East doesn't even call it suffering,
Right.
It's just the natural order of living. So they're not giving it power, they're simply, observing and moving. And so the delusion of choice is that we all then, and it got actually a little hairy towards the end of my talk, because my teacher then, I think, was like, I think delusion of choice is a much deeper Zen actual practice. It's its own koan.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, there's no answer to a koan, and so if someone's trying to say that, and so I was just simply saying that, like, if I'm doing shikantaza where I'm just sitting, that's all I've got. And so I chose to come to the meditation cushion this morning, but that's it. like, and so
that's right. You didn't
Yeah.
choose anything else.
that's right.
Well, I think that's, I mean, that always really resonates with me because that's, clinically something I talk to people a lot about, because I say like, we don't control anything in the world. I know you don't like the word control behavior, but I'm basically meaning the same thing that you're saying. We choose our behavior in this moment. We
That's
choose sometimes in the affirmative, like you chose to go sit, sometimes in the responsive, like something happens and we choose a behavior in reaction to something. But
Yes.
we don't choose like, what the weather is. We don't choose like
Right.
whether people say, we don't choose like the thoughts our mind gives us or the sensations in our body or the emotions or memories that pop up. And that's an extremely difficult practice, but it's like, because I think maybe something important to say that I think is always important to say when we have these talks about Zen concepts is like, because I feel like these are things I may have thought early in my sort of experience with them. It's like, but what's the point? Like, why talk about these things? Why grapple with koans? Like, why, and it's like, because to create space to live more fully in this moment.
That's right. Yeah. And
like, that's the point. Like, that's why we're doing it. Like, that's all there is. That's
or just shikantaza, because that's what ends up happening is everyone's looking for the outcome,
Oh yeah. No, totally. Yeah. And but I think when I'm saying live more fully in this moment, I mean shikantaza is that it's,
you do.
This is it. This is it.
It's all you got.
It's all we got. And we'll never, ever 100% hold on tight to that because again, just for listeners, remember, you got a human brain. I've got a human brain. Pete's got a human brain. The Dalai Lama's got a human brain, right? And so even monks that practice this stuff, like they're still grappling with having a human brain, even if there's,
Yeah, so it's sort of like, and I know in the West Coast, I think you guys had some rain, or maybe the last time, we talked about that. Like,
in the winter,
you could be annoyed by that, and notice the annoyance. Because, like, for me, it's like I'm drying 12 paws, and 12 bodies as I'm trying to get them, from go to the bathroom to come back inside. And so you could be really frustrated and be like, what the heck? And why is it like this? And, or you can just, notice yourself getting to that space and then, take a deep breath and move on. And so, I talked about the difference between koans and shikantaza. And I think for me, like shikantaza is something that was a little bit more kind of, it's active. So especially for like high performers, it's not easy. But koans are like, I don't know, they're just so intellectual, yet they're not supposed to be, which is what's annoying. It's like the dialectic that kind of annoys me in them. Because
wasn't like, did you say it's like to untangle the mind? Like that's the point. So you have to like get confused to create space, basically. Like,
Well, I'm confused like every day, every moment anyway. So.
sure. So it's like, they're very, it's like very, it's, well, again, I'm like extreme novice on this, but like my very minimal understanding from what you've shared, it's like using thinking to not get caught in thinking, basically.
That's right.
Right.
Using thinking to not get caught in thinking, because you will think. But shikantaza is not like, so the goal is not to always be designing your kitchen every time you're sitting. You just let it come in, and then you may want to use another skill that you have, to a mantra, a breathe, something else, because ultimately it's a brain exercise. And again, so think about it like listeners, that really life is life. And my teacher ended with a quote because he shared from his coach, teacher Glassman, and the quote was, breathe in the whole world best as I can, breathe out your response to the world the best that you can.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.